We need a new way in. We need a new way in. I'm healing. I'm healing.
Oh
I'm healing.
my
Oh,
God.
damn it! We just had a little bit more damage on it, bro.
I'm standing here in the parking lot of a strip mall in the hit 2008 open world racing game Burnout Paradise. If the developers of this game, Criterion Games, had their way, I would ignore this. How crazy is that?
A bird.
Now, the reason I would ignore it is because in a racing game, what you're primarily supposed to do is race. You're supposed to break the speed limit, drive the wrong way down the highway, crash into cars. You're supposed to never stop moving. And this is true of any racing game. Go play Mario Kart and stop moving and just watch all the toads in the audience. It's unnerving to see them as unwilling participants in emphasizing how great you are as the driver of the car. They don't really have a role other than that. You are the main character. It's not that different to how I view these people walking around outside my house actually right now. Just sort of, they're just here to hype me up. But the fact of the matter is, if you want to have a racing game in a world, in a place that feels like a world, it has to be filled with stuff. But it only has to be filled with stuff that's believable at 80 miles an hour. That stuff doesn't really have to carry all of its own weight. In the same way that if I take my glasses off, it doesn't matter as much how dirty my house is because I can't see it. I'm supposed to ignore the dust. Just like I'm supposed to ignore this really cool back alley. I mean, for God's sake, look at this thing. It's a stunning, quiet little sliver of a world without human life, but with human infrastructure, like I mean, there's power lines here. Why? Now, as I said, Burnout Paradise is a 2008 racing video game developed by Criterion Games and published by Electronic Arts. Everybody loves them. The footage you're looking at is from the remastered version of that game, which came out on digital platforms or whatever. You can buy it for like 40 bucks or 20 bucks. Or I don't know, who cares? And the game is set in a fictional city called Paradise City. It's an open world game where you can drive around and compete in a variety of different competitive game modes within that same open world. It's almost like if you built a racing game inside of Grand Theft Auto. Now, if you've never played this game, don't worry about it too much. You can kind of substitute anything that I'm saying for any open world racing game. For example, Forza Horizon 5, a lot of the same principles. There's tons of stuff in that game that you're not meant to stop and look at, even more so than most games. In fact, despite its relative fidelity, Forza Horizon 5 even has plenty of funny little things they expect you to ignore. If you actually take the time to look inside a lot of the buildings that are around the cities, you'll find instances where there are 4 or 5 of the exact same convenience store within a 1 city block radius. There are ice cream shops that look like coffee shops inside. There are coffee shops that look like coffee shops inside. There are cafes that look like coffee shops inside. But really, the underlying point is that as these games get more technologically advanced, they get closer to being a full facsimile, but never all the way there. This is kind of an uncanny valley conversation, but not exactly, because it's not uncanny. So this isn't a case of, you know, heavy rain being close but not quite there and it's really unnerving. These worlds generally aren't very unnerving because you don't actually stop to look very closely at them. Because these games are built to be viewed at 80 miles an hour, right? They're not meant to be viewed stopping and looking at all these little details. If you walk around the back alleys of Burnout Paradise and you walk around the back alleys of real human Earth life, you'll be able to tell the difference between those two things. But there is a point at which, if you go through the back alleys of a real world city block at faster and faster speeds, there is a speed at which that back alley will be indistinguishable from the back alley in Burnout Paradise, and that's the trick that they're playing on you. Now, this does happen in other genres of games, of course, and it also happens in other eras of genres of games, but it presents a little bit differently. So take Mario 64, for example. You know, I've spent a lot of time talking about these odd and unremarkable spaces in a game like Mario 64, and it's fair to say that there are spots in Mario 64 that the developers intended you to ignore, places that they didn't put extra work in to make them interesting to look at. But the funny thing about these older games is that the whole game is so low fidelity that the parts you aren't supposed to look at don't actually
What
look
do I
at no different
do?
than the parts
There's
you are
nobody
supposed to look
here.
at. So while you can find things in Mario 64 that certainly they weren't intending you to look at, for example, the ceiling of this room, or even just looking at things from different angles, it's not like they look fundamentally less touched than the rest of the game. Mario Kart 64, another great example of this. We've spent plenty of time talking about the inside of the tunnel on Calamari Desert, or just staring into the valley on Donkey Kong Valley, or whatever the level's called. I have a whole video about it. But those things are unusual just because we're not used to looking at them. Not because they actually look any different than the rest of the game. You see what I'm saying? You're picking up what I'm putting down. The thing I'm talking about with Burnout Paradise required that we get a little further technologically, so the restriction on the vision became time and energy rather than console horsepower. You know, games are hundreds of gigabytes in size now. They take 5 to 10 years to develop at times. So as long as you have the vision and the drive to work your employees into the ground, you can really make anything you want, which means the human brains of the developers are the things metering the decisions about what to pay attention to and what not to, rather than the technology. And that's where these little ignored spaces can slip through. Now, there's also the other end of the spectrum, where game developers pushed the time and energy to such limits that there really wasn't much that wasn't meant to be looked at, but we'll get to that a little bit later. The point is, there are a lot of places like this that I absolutely love. And this is probably my favorite one, this strip mall parking lot. I regularly come back here to take in sort of the energy of it. I think there's a lot of space to discuss Burnout Paradise as being a wonderful microcosm of life in 2008 for a certain type of suburban teenager. And I think this strip mall parking lot does a good job of evoking that feeling. But there's lots of other places in this game that have that same one. For example, entire parking garages that nobody parks in, because there's only two types of cars in this game. There's cars that are moving and there are cars that are parked. There are no parked cars that move and no moved cars that park unless you do it yourself. Wouldn't it be interesting to watch somebody park a car in Burnout Paradise? Because you're not supposed to do that. Well, you're in luck, because I did it. Take a look at this. And, oh, there we go. Parked. The grocery store parking lot meme is huge. People are finally coming to terms with the
What was I supposed to do?
vapid suburban philosophical beauty of concrete, asphalt, utility infrastructure. The sunsets in the Target parking lot are better than the sunsets on a mountain. Literally true? No, but it does change the tone of how you interpret it. When your feet hurt and the wheel on the cart doesn't want to move, and you drop your keys on the asphalt, the eternal beauty of the universe hits you differently. It's not even the universe, it's just Earth, actually. The universe is dark. I love seeing and feeling the cars whiz by me. Look out. Gonna get hit by... I love watching the game do its absolute best to indefatigably... That's the worst word I've ever said. That is the most pretentious word I've ever said. I love watching the game indefatigably repeat the performance of the hustle and bustle of the real world. It never stops trying to convince you that this is a place with stuff, but it's not. Another thing that we're supposed to ignore when we play Burnout Paradise are the newspapers in the newspaper stands. You're not supposed to look at them. You're not even supposed to know that there's a newspaper stand there other than when it hits the front of your car. It's just fodder to imply that you're causing chaos. But take a look at what's actually written on these. Front page sports news is mountain climbers. What kind of place is this? Where's LeBron James? Somebody's hosting a tango dance festival. Front page news. And also, I can't read that one. Can we enhance that so we can see what that actually says? 5 children took Charlie moment whipped tonight at Temple Hall. What does that say? And that actually gets to the core of one of the reasons why I think Burnout Paradise in particular is such an incredible game. Because as we've said, with any racing game, there's so much stuff that you're supposed to whiz by and not look at. But all of this stuff in the case of Burnout Paradise has to look like a microcosm of American culture at a particular time. They want it to feel like you're in kind of the perfect early 2000s utopian suburban but not too suburban city in America, which means it has to look like that from a distance. But it doesn't have to look like that up close. What you get up close is, what was this game developer's immediate thought about what might constitute American culture in its most thoughtless form. You know, if you look closely, everything in Burnout Paradise is on sale. Literally every shop just has a for sale sign. The billboards are for streaming services, police recruitment, coffee or some sort of milk, some sort of nasty bee milk. You know, there's a real rawness and like an immediacy to the way that racing game worlds feel because of that, which isn't necessarily the case with non-racing equivalents. I said earlier that there are these super high fidelity games, like games made by companies like Rockstar. You could even include something like Mario Odyssey from Nintendo on that list. One of my favorite examples is Grand Theft Auto 4. Because Grand Theft Auto 4 was really the first game I can remember that was huge in scope and thorough in execution. So there's plenty of stuff in this game that they didn't expect us to look at, but very little stuff that they didn't look at themselves. You know, they didn't expect us to stop and hang out with these people on the street. We weren't meant to keep this porter company on his break at work outside of the whatever that machine is, I don't know. But all that stuff is there, so if you do pay attention to it, it's reciprocated. Even the ambient city infrastructure feels thought out and cohesive, which does beg the question whether all of this piping actually goes somewhere. Like if we followed the power lines from Grand Theft Auto, would they go from a house to a substation to a power plant? It's a question for another day.
Don't steal my ideas.
The point is, with Burnout Paradise, you often get this sort of Freudian slip interpretation of the environment that they're trying to ape. Whereas with something like Grand Theft Auto 4, you're getting more of a thought-out dissertation on the object of parody. The point that I'm trying to make here is this. Next time you beat a racing game, once you've gotten all the gold medals, you've unlocked all the cars and the parts, you've had your fun with the online multiplayer, before you put it down, stop. Look around. Drive backwards on the track. You might just find something neat, odd, amusing, or beautiful to look at, and it might just give you that childlike love of video games that you've been chasing ever since you had to get a full-time job, and now you're stressed out all the time. You know, what are you gonna do? Thanks for watching. See you guys next time.
And offered an extremely positive experience for the general player base. They don't offer anything over the top in terms of story. It's usually just a short trip like this one to a special location that has a unique encounter. And certainly the end goal is that Pokémon. You go to Southern Island to get Latios, just like you go to New Moon Island to get Darkrai. That's the raw cause and effect if you remove all the emotion from the equation. And that's exactly what happened with Pokemon like Volcanion and Zeraora that were distributed straight to players. No event story in-game. Still cool, but that emotion and attachment gets stripped away when you remove these little journeys. And it's arguably the most important part. It's the experience. Let's follow that experience using the Eon ticket here as an example. Your dad receives a strange letter addressed to you with an unfamiliar boat ticket inside. Even though he's a big-time gym leader in Hoenn, he's never seen anything like this before, so he recommends you get it checked out in Lily Cove City, a port town with a ferry service. The sailors there will probably have a better idea about what's going on. So you take the ticket to the shipyard and try to present it to the attendant, but you're interrupted by a gruff and rugged sailor who likes saying stuff like, "Oi, matey!" So you know he's serious about sailing. He knows of the location on the ticket, but it's still largely unclear what lies in wait on the island. Oi, matey, etc. It's a thrilling and exciting mystery for him, so he's willing to take a trip with you. Anchors away. After the boat ride and actually on the island, you find a winding, grassy path running through a dense ocean of trees. Other than a bare-bones platform for the boat to dock at and some simple stairs up the path, the island appears to be completely untouched by humans. The music is the same theme that plays at the abandoned ship, and it's fitting for another location that seems to have been forgotten by time, albeit maybe for a different reason. There's almost a mystical, divine quality to the place because of these things, like you might be the first person who's walked this path in a very long time. At the end of the way, before an entrance to an enclosure within the forest, you find a sign that reads, What does this mean? Who put it here? Why is it on this island? There's simple but soul-searching intrigue contained in this signpost. It's a somber but also hopeful sentiment. Even though my memories become more distant with time, I'd like to think that they'll always be a part of me, at least in some way. It's got me really thinking about my life. So, thanks, random signpost. Beyond the sign, you head inside the forest enclosure and find an unusual stone surrounded by a shallow puddle of water. The stone has an otherworldly appearance. It looks like a moon rock or something from another planet entirely. It commands interest to the center of the area, and upon interacting with it, the legendary dragon respective to your version descends from the skies and challenges you to a battle. A legendary encounter in a legendary place. And if you happen to check the rock again afterwards, you're greeted with another strange saying, "All dreams are but another reality. Never forget." There's little to no concrete story here, but the short journey from swiping your real-life ticket to having the encounter is an evocative experience. They employ subtle storytelling that creates intrigue and inspires awe.
I
And
should
that's
have
just the
stayed on
one.
the outside.
Events
to
like
block
these
them
were
in.
littered across the games, both in the main story and event distributions. The Reggies, Deoxys, Darkrock, Shaman, Giratina, and Diamond and Pearl, just to name a few. But for me, there's an even more perfect delivery here with the Eon ticket, because the packaging is perfect too. Not only did I get to have this special adventure on this special island, but I physically own the ticket that got me on the boat. This is unprecedented immersion. There's an extreme dedication to the bit here. And so I think in some ways it is firmly the best event Pokemon ever held. I can confidently describe the gameplay and hardware that goes into it as an actual event. It really lives up to that word. And the only downside is that the Eon ticket was one of a kind in this way. It was that golden goose of the e-reader. I can only dream of there being more events like it, fantasizing about those possibilities. What would this type of event have looked like for a Pokemon like Celebi, or Raikou, or Jirachi? What sort of music will be heard? These are at the core of that missing potential. Those lost fragments I wish we all could have seen. But I find myself so happy now because I don't have to wonder anymore. With Blissey's DLC pack, we've got cards and stories for all those Pokemon, and more. Every legendary and mythical not covered in Gen 3's main stories has a card and event to go with it. And even some bonus ones on top, all compatible with Ruby and
I didn't
Sapphire,
realize. I
and
thought
even
he was
some
going
extended
towards me.
support for
I didn't
Emerald.
realize it.
Every card scans indistinguishably from the real thing, and the games read them as such. The events were painstakingly coded and engineered to dispense the Pokemon identically to the way they did in their original events, except now they're all encounters instead of gifts. Even better. Like the Jirachi card, for example, has you fighting a carbon copy of the Pokemon Channel Jirachi, and it reads to the games as completely legal. It doesn't set off any flags. Now, of course, this doesn't make it the real thing. There's a big jump between legal and legitimacy, and we all collect and play for different reasons. So it's up to the individual in a lot of ways what all of this means to them, but they are all 100% legal by that technical definition, and as such can make a successful pass up to Pokemon Home. And I have to appreciate that excruciating level of attention to detail that went into making this as authentic as physically possible so much later after the fact. And the overall delivery on those ideas, it's perfect. Perfect. Everything. Down to the last minute detail. Every card is double-sided and filled with loving detail. The front side features a silhouette of the event Pokemon next to the game logo, all in front of the event's location. And the back side shows a stylized Pokédex entry with a small blurb explaining the event story. The silhouetted side offers a subtle intrigue, alongside a sleek, sort of classic Pokemon card aesthetic. While the Pokédex entry draws on the existing lore of each Pokemon and extends it into a brief story for the Hoenn region that you can go experience right this very second. Don't just take my word for it either. Go play them right now. Everything is freely available to download, print, and set up on Blissey's page. But if you don't have the means to set it all up physically, because yeah, that's a lot, they've got a guide to run the events completely digitally as well. No e-reader or cards required. They even set up the means to access the defunct e-reader support on Emerald despite it normally not being accessible outside of Japan. The package just wouldn't be complete without all these accessibility measures too. No expense was spared in making sure the greatest number of people could experience this masterpiece. And so assuming
did
you
we
either went and
lose
played
it?
them for yourself,
Who was
or you just
hitting
want to
it?
keep hearing my lovely voice on the subject, thanks so much. Let's talk about that experience. That being the thing you actually see and play with at the end of the day. A big part of the design here was to avoid receiving or encountering the Pokémon in the events at the Pokémon Center from the Mystery Gift Men. I really appreciate this subtle focus. There is a certain thrill in interacting with the Mystery Gift Man, but the overall process is definitely lacking when he just hands you a Pokemon. The Pokemon itself is generally pretty exciting, unless it's this one, but the experience itself is lazy at best. I like heading out for a battle, something like Darkrai or Shaman, or even better, a mini-story, like Zoroark and the Shiny Beasts in Black and White 1. And to my absolute delight, here with the cards, every Pokemon is an encounter out in the overworld with locations based around lore to do with that respective Pokemon, some more thematic than others. And it makes sense because there's not a perfect place for every one of these legends in the Hoenn region. Like Mew, for example, is fought in the tall grass on Route 120. There's no story reason for Mew to be here, but the route itself is reminiscent of the island Mew is caught on in its native event, so it still makes enough sense. And in the end, it's ultimately super well done, as the object Mew is mapped onto is one of the invisible Kecleons. And one of Mew's most noteworthy abilities in media and stories surrounding it is to turn invisible, so I think it still offers on that experience, even with it being sort of a what-if scenario. Now the only snag with this, and a few of the cards, is that it can be a little difficult to know where to go on the route and what to interact with, as the events are all mapped onto existing objects with their own functions, like Mew on the Kecleon tile, or Entei on this boulder, for instance. This mapping encounters onto objects is just a symptom of the way the events had to be created though, and they couldn't exist otherwise, but this tiny weakness is almost made into a strength through the cards themselves. Because the picture of the location on the card shows you exactly where you need to go. They're cleverly focused on the event's location. Like Meteor Falls is a pretty big place, but I know that I need to get to this exact location before I start interacting with things. Makes it a lot easier. If you're doing it without looking at the cards or Blissy's videos, it's just a little extra bit to be aware of. My absolute favorite out of the batch has to be Jirachi in the White Rock, because this one is total wish fulfillment for me. I was one of those kids on one of those playgrounds that was absolutely convinced Jirachi was somehow tied to this rock. And I think that makes sense, because there's so much about the location in-game that sticks out to anyone with a sense for RPGs. It makes you feel like they have to be telling you something with this. An off-colored rock at a space-themed location? An NPC even tells you that it's vaguely related to wishes? I think it's more shocking that Jirachi isn't related to the rock in some way, and so it's incredibly satisfying to actually swipe the physical card, head to Moss Deep, get some light dialogue about wish-making, and then fighting it out with Jirachi in royal fashion. Talk about being surrounded by beauty, because this is it. The pinnacle of this project, in my opinion, and the extent of this magical creation is best captured in the cards for the Johto Beasts. Blissey went the extra mile with these ones, as all three cards are part of an overarching story that you have to play in order to get the whole thing. And there's even a fourth bonus card thrown in to wrap up the story and hand out some extra rewards. These are miles beyond just simple encounters. These stories rival, if not altogether eclipse, the Eon Tickets experience. You've seen from the Johto region wants your help as he tracks down Suicune and needs to find Entei and Raikou along the way. You'll have to solve Braille puzzles, take down mighty foes, and enjoy references to Pokemon's extended lore as you go on a quest for the ages. You can trust that those who succeed and make it to the fourth card will be rewarded handily. I'm resistant to say too much though, because I had such a good time playing them on stream for the first time, and I really can't recommend these specific cards enough. They were able to uniquely cram NPC interactions and Braille puzzles into these ones, and it's all contained in these 4 tiny code cards, and I got to experience them on my childhood cartridge. This whole project is truly a miracle to me. These cartridges, this generation, they were pushed to their absolute limit with these cards. new, but also unobtrusive content for games that came out so long ago. It's the absolute dream scenario for a fan of a retro game. So I implore you to check the cards out, try the events for yourself, get set up with an e-reader if you can find one, and hopefully rekindle some of that childhood whimsy. Because if you're looking for the way that these games made you feel when they first came out, then look no further, because here it is. It's one of the most important projects I've ever come across in this community. It's an ode to creation and preservation, and a part of me is still in disbelief. Super special thanks again to Blissey, obviously for creating these masterpieces, but also for sending me a set of cards and helping me out with them so I could experience firsthand this incredible work of art. You should absolutely check out their channel, watch their videos. If you're feeling hungry for any of the technical details on this, or really just on Pokemon things in general, you're gonna love what they put out. All sorts of links are in the description. And thanks to you if you made it this far. I really hope you enjoyed this one, perhaps a little bit different than what I usually do, but this was an extremely special case. Let me know your thoughts down below as always, and I'll see you all next time. Droomish out.
That was a great video. Watch like video. Damn.
Okay, I think it's all recording. Welcome, everybody, welcome. We're all set up, and we're gonna be... Okay, I think it's all recording. Welcome, everybody, welcome. We're all set up, and we're...
Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. Games that are nothing short of Pokemon Odysseys. Absolutely classic entries in the series that can easily be viewed as perfect in so many ways. Especially with Emerald as that deluxe version of the generation. There seems to be near universal agreement from the community that this is one of the greats. Right up there with Platinum, Heart Gold, and Soul Silver. There's an extremely complete feeling to it, as the game is absolutely packed with content and activities. But that still hasn't stopped people from trying to make it all the greater. There's plenty that you could lovingly view as missing from these games, especially with a distant, post-release point of view. There's some missing legendaries and their stories, unfulfilled or no longer possible events, and certain minor oddities like the White Rock or the rocket launches with seemingly untapped potential. Community members have gone to great lengths to hone in on these aspects and make the game that they already love so much even more incredible, leading to the creation of plenty of ROM hacks and patches with the express purpose of making Emerald and Ruby and Sapphire rise even higher, and that love for the game really shines through. But try as we might, the game itself, at its core, was and is a done deal. They were released at a time where there was generally no room for updates or bonus content, so that core game is locked into history. We can only create homages to these wonderful cartridges. At least, that's what I thought. Because as you might have gathered from the title of this video, there's something new on the scene that has caught my eye. Working DLC has been created, as authentically as it possibly could be, for the Gen 3 Game Boy Advance titles. That is completely compatible with original, vanilla, garden variety cartridges. Fulfilling some of that missed potential, telling new stories, and creating new experiences all alongside the original hardware. The incredible developer of this DLC, I'm a Blissey, has created something here I consider so monumental and incredibly important, not only for Gen 3 and the Pokemon community, but perhaps even for video games and their preservation as a whole. And it's the significance that I want to discuss today. But let's first do a brief overview of what we're looking at here so we're all on the same page. This DLC was created very purposefully to feel like the mystery gifts and legendary storylines of the original time period, such as visiting Latios or Latios on the legendary Southern Island, or hunting down the elemental birds in Fire Red and Leaf Green, with the actual content that you and I can play at home being more of those special encounters with legendaries or mythicals that for whatever reason didn't make the base cut of the games. And in some special cases, there's even been additional puzzles and stories attached to the encounters. You can grab everything you need right now over on Blissey's page. But unbelievably, there's no hacking required here, at least for end users like you and me. Because despite the long list of custom events, Pokémon, and stories, Blissey went to extreme lengths to emphasize authenticity in every step of the process. And so the events are just as quote-unquote real as any other you'd experience during the original time frame. The Pokemon pass legality checks all the way up to home, there's no need for save editing or injecting in any form, and it all runs on original physical hardware. And all of that is possible because of the Nintendo e-reader, an oft-forgotten GBA accessory with the express purpose of adding extra content to games by using its scannable cards in lieu of online or wireless downloads. You run the e-reader on one Game Boy, scan a compatible code card, and then send the bonus content to the actual game running on a second Game Boy. Yeah, it's a bit of a bulky process. And now, years and years later, Blissey has amazingly deconstructed, reverse engineered, and I dare say even improved that original functionality through the advent of their own custom code cards. You scan the card for Jirachi, for example, and a special encounter at the Moss Deep White Rock gets sent to your cartridge with no issue. That's the long and short of the experience for the general player or spectator. If you're curious about all the juicy technical details on how they were coded and designed, you should definitely check out the videos Blissey themselves did on the entire project. Links are in the description and on screen. But I'm more of a fledgling coder myself. You know, hello world and all that. Those finer details are all a bit over my head. But that's just fine, because this is more of a focused analysis and or review type of thing. The main focus I'm concerned with here, and ultimately amazed at, is that it works, it all checks out, and most importantly, it's fun. More than fun, even. Magical might be a better word. This DLC isn't just a logistical port and preservation of Gen 3 era mystery gifts and distributions. It goes above and beyond that bar. It captures the magic and mystery we experienced playing these games for the first time, with new entries in their legends and lore. The mystique of uncovering the Reggies for the first time. The thrill of summoning Deoxys on Birth Island. Those feelings are here, captured completely. And that's because the emphasis isn't just on software and hardware authenticity. Experience authenticity was emphasized as well. These are new stories thematically indistinguishable from those of old. And I was having a Ratatouille food critic moment the